Hello, everyone. Wishing you a very happy new year and welcome to today's session, a guide to incident response framework, IR case lifecycle, protocols and strategies. I'm Shila Goos Swami and I'll be your host for the day. Before we get started, we would like to go over a few house rules for our attendees. The session will be in listen only mode and will last for an hour, out of which last 10 minutes will be dedicated to Q&A. If you have any audio video challenges, please check the internet connections or you may log out and log in again. If you have any questions during the webinar, you can reach out to our organizers or our speaker and use the Q&A window. An important announcement for our audiences. We have initiated CPE credit certificates for our participants, and to qualify for one of attendees are required to attend the entire webinar and then send an email to cybertalks@ecouncil.org, after which our team will issue the CPE certificate. Also, we would like to announce to our audiences about the special handouts. Take the screenshots of the running webinar and post in your social media, LinkedIn or Twitter, tagging EC Council and hashtag CyberTalks. We will share the free handouts to first 10 audiences. Now, to recognize the leadership ability of cybersecurity professionals in managing critical operations within a CISO's office, EC Council has launched the Associate CISO Grandfathering Initiative. This initiative helps candidates validate their extensive work, experience, leadership skills, and business acumen in information security management without requiring them to sit for any examination. To learn more about the Associate CISO Grandfathering Program or to submit your application, please visit the link shared in the chat section.
Get recognized as a cybersecurity leader with EC Council's Associate CISO Grandfathering Program. EC Council invites subject matter experts with 5 years of cumulative experience in the below Associate CISO domains: governance and risk management, information security controls and audit management, program management and operations, information security core competencies, strategic planning, finance, procurement, and vendor management. Applicants must prove their expertise by nominating individuals to verify their experience, or provide valid CISSP, CISM, or CISA certification as evidenced to verify their experience. This process recognizes expertise, knowledge, skills, and abilities gained over years of experience for taking on influential cybersecurity leadership positions. The Associate CISO Grandfathering Program is a stepping stone for achieving the golden standard of cybersecurity leadership, the Certified CISO certification CISO. It's your launchpad to the pinnacle of cybersecurity leadership. Bridge the leadership void in the CISO's office. Get recognized as a cybersecurity leader with Associate CISO. Grandfathering now open for a limited time. Visit associateciso.ecouncil.org.
If you want to know more, kindly visit our website given in the chat section. Now about our speaker, Ada DeBarro. Ada is a graduate of Roger Williams University School of Law, where he earned his Juris Doctor. He has also earned a Master of Science in Cybersecurity. He has led TransUnion Incident Response Forensic team over the last 6 years. In his leading from the front style, Ada has led the IRF team through thousands of cases ranging from unauthorized cryptocurrency mining, ransomware, business email compromises, and much more. Ada also has 16 years of experience in the United States Rhode Island Army National Guard, where he led troops as team leader on a combat deployment in the Kandahar province in support of Operation Enduring Freedom, and currently perform duties at the state headquarters level. He is a certified mediator. His expertise includes solution, product creation, program development and expansion, threat assessment, risk mitigation, security process improvement, privacy compliance, and contract drafting. He has worked with over 1,000 organizations in his current capacity, helping them determine and react to the nature of the security incident breaches and determining the best course of action to recover to safe operations and meet compliance obligations. Without any further delay, I would hand over the session to you, Edith.
Thank you for the warm and kind introductions, Shilpa. Much appreciated. Good morning, everyone. As Shilpa mentioned, my name is Eder. I lead the incident response forensics team here at TransUnion on a global basis and amongst other duties. I'm pleased for the opportunity to provide this webinar today. This is the first session of what will ultimately be a 5 session or episode series where we'll talk about different topics within the incident response realm. Today is somewhat of a initial overview session. So today's session is, as you can see, called Incident Response Case Lifecycle Protocols and Strategies. So it's pretty straightforward. We will be covering what is the incident response case lifecycle. There are 4 main cycles. As we go through the cycles, we will give you some information based on real world experience and real world cases. And we'll cover protocols that are common in the IR industry. And it's what you will see if you join this industry of ours in a security capacity, whether you're at a DFIR, digital forensics incident response firm, or DFIR for short, or if you're internal perhaps and you belong to some sort of red team or a SOC that does security work in some parts of its operations. So without further ado, we have lots of content to cover today. And so in very little time, this is enough content to be days worth if we really went really deep here. So again, this is more of an overview. We're just going to scratch the surface. So this way you have a base understanding of the IR life cycle, what are the common things that you will see in the field, and that will also build a nice base for next month's session, where we'll focus on a different topic, which I'll mention towards the end, so you have an idea where we're going. Without further ado, here we go. There are 4 main parts of the incident response lifecycle, and these parts are defined as the preparation, the detection and analysis, the containment and eradication phase, and the post-incident activity stage. Each one of these stages comes with unique challenges and unique considerations. You will also find trends, however, in each stage, as you will in any kind of workflow. We will begin in this order because I think that makes the most sense to cover in the order that it actually goes. And that's how it is in the real world. But one of the main trends that you have to, from any time and then from here forward, and the big takeaway from this is you have to figure out how you as the security professional will work together with the business side of your organization. It is incredibly common that these parts don't talk well and that they don't work well often together. Some organizations tend to be a bit neglectful of the CISO, or if they're big enough to have a CISO, or whatever, their IT director, InfoSec director, and InfoSec teams, and vice versa. But in order to be really effective, proactively and reactively, when it comes to incident response, you must figure out how to speak their language and how to work together with them in order to achieve the ultimate goals of the business. Okay, so having that immersive relationship within the entire leadership team, and bridging the communication gaps, the technicality gaps, and things of that sort between your tactical teams who are going to be very technical and your leadership teams who will not be technical at all, is a key thing that you have to consider when you're in the position of the security analyst, and especially if you're in a position of being a security leader. So with that being said, let's talk on the preparation stage. This is going to be peacetime, or pre-breach, as some folks like to call. In our industry, incident response, we don't like to use the word breach very often because that has legal implications and other implications that we don't have. It's really outside the scope of this call. But so I do advise you to also make sure that you're being careful with the language that you use out there in the real world. Let's refer to a cyber attack or something that happened at the organization as an incident. That's how I will refer it from pretty much all the time. So if you hear me talk about an incident, that's when we're talking about something bad happened that you now have to respond to. In order to have a proper preparation, you need an incident response plan, first and foremost. Every organization should have one. Many organizations are now becoming forced to create one. Recently, as for this tax year of 2024, the tax preparer accountancy industry is also now requiring that accountants create incident response plans, which is a brand new thing. It's not something they had to have in 2023. And that just goes to show you how important it is that you actually have a plan on how you will address issues, because without a plan, often organizations have no idea how to actually really deal with a cyber event, and that can lead to not only havoc and just a large pain and mess within the organization, but it can also be how an organization hemorrhages resources and funds during a cyber event. Okay, so an incident response plan needs to, at minimum, cover the things the items you see on this slide. It needs to be very detailed on roles and responsibilities. You need to identify in those plans who is in charge of what, who is the CFO, the one who will make every financial decision, and everything from software costs to vendor management costs and external party costs, anything that you may have to quickly spend funds in order to recover from a cyber incident, or is that something where some of that power is shared? These are things that you should be covering in great detail. Additionally, when it comes to roles and responsibilities, it's critical that you also build a backup to that infrastructure, because you never know when an incident's going to happen. I'm sure that all of you, based on that you're the kind of folks that attend these cyber talks, you've probably heard that threat actors love to hit companies and organizations during the holidays, during long weekends, right? Because the idea is that the security teams will be degraded during those times. So it's not uncommon for us to see a lot of claims come in on a weekend or on a Monday when people return to the office, but the attack really happened over the weekend because there are less people around to see and to react. So with that being said, your roles and responsibilities absolutely must cover what happens if a decision maker is no longer available, whether they're on PTO or whatever the case may be. You need to have at minimum a secondary, if not a tertiary level of personnel who will be able to step up and make decisions, because when things happen, a lot of decisions have to be made early on. Those first 24 hours of responding to an incident can be quite critical, especially at the leadership level, because it'll determine where resources will get spent. Second, you need to have your standard operating procedures, or your SOPs for short. this is going to be your how-tos, right? And this needs to cover all facets of your environment. There's a reason why we leave it at a somewhat generic sense here on this slide, because who knows what environment you will be in. You may be in an org that's all cloud, you may be in an org that's all on-premise. More likely than not, especially nowadays, you're going to be in an org that's a hybrid environment. Some things are on cloud, some things are on-premise. You may have proprietary software that you deal with for whatever reason, because maybe you work at a medical, or a manufacturer or something that has proprietary software. So all these things have to be taken into account when you are talking about your standard operating procedures, but your incident response plan has to cover how each critical piece of your digital infrastructure is set up, not to a granular level, but at least to a this is where resources are, this is where data is stored, this is how it's stored, is it encrypted at rest, is it not encrypted, what security measures are around it, and what do we need to do to recover it if that piece of the infrastructure becomes compromised. Next, you need to understand who else will be needed in the event that your organization suffers a cyber incident. That's where you're going to see in a big way, cyber insurance come in and external vendors. It's unlikely, unless you are working in a very large organization, that you will not have some sort of external vendors. And even the large organizations, quite often, for sure, they will need some level of external vendors to support a cyber incident for different reasons, not because they might not have the skill sets in-house, but there's other considerations, such as having to bring objectivity to an analysis that may require third parties to get involved. Cyber insurance is a huge part of responding to a cyber incident. Most organizations do benefit from cyber insurance. It's something we always recommend organizations to look into if they haven't, and that includes at the micro and small, medium-sized entity businesses, especially those. Okay, there's a lot of products out there nowadays that are bolt-on insurance products that go right into their general liability insurance or full-blown cyber insurance. There's a lot that's available, and it can be a real make it or break it for an organization from a cost perspective and from an ability to quickly gain access to external experts who can help them through the rest of this incident response lifecycle, because many of you will find yourselves in an SME, right, a small or medium-sized entity, and perhaps even a micro. You may be the entire IT department, you may be the entire security team, or you may have a two-person team managing a decent-sized infrastructure from a security perspective. You're going to need support, and the insurance is going to come in big to help with not only, again, access, but the funding. Another large part of the life cycle here when it comes to the plan, privacy considerations. One of the things that hurts many businesses the most during a cyber incident, believe it or not, is not always the actual potential compromise to the environment or the compromise to the environment and or your data. It's often the privacy impact, especially if you're in a business that hosts sensitive information, that's the type of information that would be classified as personally identifiable information, or PII for short. If you are hosting personal information for clients specifically, on top of the personal information you may have for your staff, like HR data, this can all trigger lots of government compliance, lots of dealing with regulators. Especially if you're hosting data that is of a personal nature for clients that are outside of the US, especially if they're in Europe, GDPR would then become applicable. There's lots here that happens. So these considerations have to be taken into account. If we have a cyber incident and it hits this specific place where we store this type of data, what does that mean for us? Do we have to bring legal counsel in right away? Do we have to, deal with a regulator? All these things have to be in your response plan, okay? Because you're going to find that many jurisdictions now, and in the U.S., states are now starting to develop their own individual incident or / breach response regulations or laws. And some of these require an organization who suffers an incident to reach out to a regulator in a very short time span, 48 hours, 72 hours, and some, not just something more vapid such as, earliest availability, but with an actual hard line. And you want to make sure that if you have a hard time that you have to meet when it comes to dealing with a regulator, that you are not running afoul of that, because the consequences can be dire. Finally, you want to take into account the optics here, the PR, right? The marketing kind of look from this whole thing. Cyber incidents can be very detrimental to the health of an organization, simply based on how it makes things look. It can really result in loss of business. It can result in loss of reputation, and that loss of reputation can result in all sorts of other negative effects. So these are some of the biggest points that you want to cover when you prepare an incident response plan for your organization. Out of these, the ones that will likely have the largest amount of work for you as the security professional as you're developing this is likely going to be the SOPs, right? Because that's where you are really going to be key in drafting detailed guidance on the infrastructure, what's available, what's not available, and what needs to be done to remediate it. You will then have to work with the business side to fill in the gaps on a lot of these other subjects, which again, it's why in that first slide, I wanted to say the key here is that you have to work together to be effective. Some of the protocols we already talked through here, okay? So you can all read the slides, and I'm sure you will get copies of this. Again, you as the tech / security leadership, you have to lead the charge before, during, and after a cyber incident, because you will know the security better than anyone else. But you also must understand how does security fall in line with the company's actual goals, because it absolutely should, but it's not always obvious for a lot of business leaders that maintaining proper cyber hygiene and proper cybersecurity is in line with whatever it is that their business goals may be. But make sure that you are outlining what your security goals are, and that you use that outline to drive focus into what your decision making is and into what your requests are for resources, whatever those resources may be from your executive leadership. Okay. When you create this plan, it's not something that you just shove in on a shelf somewhere and it just sits there collecting dust until the day you have an incident. These plans have to be reevaluated, they have to be tweaked, and they have to be tested. It is recommended that you crack your IR plan open at minimum once a year, review the content that's in there, identify whether that content is still true and whether the remediation plans that you're going to put in your SOPs are still valid, and because you may have gotten new apps or moved your data or environment elsewhere, you may have moved to cloud, who knows what changes you made over a year that now may have an impact on that plan. And additionally, you then want to test that plan. The testing of an incident response plan is best done by what we call a tabletop exercise, and that's where a forensic or incident response company like ours would normally come in and have a long 3 to 4 hour session with the leadership, and you take them through examples of cyber incidents, and you test their knowledge of the incident response plan. You test the incident response plan itself and how well it is created or drafted to address real world cyber incidents, so you can understand what gaps you may actually have in your plan. And of course, it goes without saying, you need to educate leaders ahead of any testing, and you need to continue education of your internal stakeholders if you're going to be effective in having a successful incident response plan that will actually aid to the recovery of your organization in the event that you have a cyber compromise. Next, we're going to talk about the next stage. This is detection and analysis. Notice that I say it's cyclical, okay? But that's because it's happening at the same time as other stages, not like preparation. That's happening only before you have an incident, right? Once you have an incident, you're done preparing. It's time to focus on other things. So detection and analysis is going to last several days, unlike what some folks may think, that it's something that is beginning to end within the first 24 hours. It's quite the opposite of that. Okay. Some of the critical things that you need to consider here for your organization. How can you detect an incident? Do you have a SOC? Are you too small for a SOC? If you're an SME, the chances you have an actual SOC is probably slim to none. So do you have an external IT provider that can provide you adequate support to help you detect and analyze a cyber incident? Do you, or if not, maybe perhaps your organization needs to consider spending the resources to contract with a managed security service provider, or an MSSP for short. Okay, so these are going to be IT security companies who will have more robust capabilities than your average, somewhat mom and pop IT business that can help you manage security, which would certainly include detection of threats and eradication of threats, which, as you can see from the art over here, that it's part of that cyclical stage. Okay, you have to consider attack vectors early on when you're looking at detection, because knowing where you could have been hit from will help you then pinpoint the actual compromise. It doesn't always make sense to just say, especially if you have a highly segmented environment and a hybrid environment, to say, well, we have to look at everything, because you may not have the resources. And if you're in a micro to SME organization space, you won't have the resources to look at everything all at once. You just simply won't have enough people to look at these environments in any level of detail. So you need to understand the attack vectors, and it's always going to start usually with what's on the edge, meaning what's calling out, what has access to the world, what has access to the internet. So do you have, remote desktop enabled on servers that are talking out to the internet? Do you have, Exchange environments or terminal services running on premise that are now external facing and likely just statistically to be a bigger target of a threat actor? Same thing for your cloud instances. What do you have that is accessible to the world in some sort of way? Maybe you have a web portal that you're hosting on the cloud, something of that sort. These are all, more likely than not places that a threat actor may begin their penetration. So considering attack vectors early on and understanding where the attack vectors are is a key part of the detection of a cyber incident. You also need to consider what solutions you have in place. What tools does your SOC have? What skill sets do you have internally? What skill sets do you have externally, which is why you need to also consider external support. Do you have that MSSP? Do you know if that MSSP can provide eradication and containment services, or your IT support? The IT support often can't provide proper containment or recovery services. That tends to be more of an MSSP level, and you have to take into account, forensics. Are you bringing an external forensic vendor to do an analysis? If so, what implications that create for your team because there's evidence preservation and other things that you need to think of that the forensic vendor is going to require, which will then change how you operate in those very early phases of the cyber incident, because it means you can't just go on deleting things and wiping systems and doing some of the work that you think you may need to do in order to get the company back up and running right away. And then finally, how are you handling the dissemination of information, right? How are you keeping people informed? Yeah, not just on the security team, but how are you feeding critical information about what your security team is doing, how it will, what are the likely results of these actions, what's the ultimate goal of these actions, to those business leaders who have to make decisions based on resources and decisions that are going to guide the future of the organization and what will happen to the organization throughout the incident response cycle. They need to have some level of understanding of what's going on. Otherwise, they're not in a best position to make decisions. And we see this far too often, where the security teams don't communicate very adequately with the business team, and the business team ends up bringing in resources that were not necessary, which then drains their financial resources, or that business team ends up not approving resources that you may think are critical right away. So make sure that you are considering how you will disseminate information during an incident. This allows us to move forward here into the next part of that cyclical phase, right? That's going to be containment, eradication, recovery. I'm presenting these prior to the protocols, okay, just because I want you to understand this context before we go into the actual protocol. So if you notice that, we haven't had a protocol screen, it's coming. This is where you're going to need to have specific types of technologies in place. It is going to make your life a lot easier as a security professional if your organization already has proper deployment of an NDR or an EDR, some sort of endpoint detection response technology that will allow you to hopefully detect, but also contain and eradicate a potential threat, especially if that threat, again, is on your local environment. It certainly, beats the next phase for the most part, which is, the next bullet here, which is manual containment. Can you contain a cyber incident manually? Yes, you can. We have had to do it under some extreme circumstances, but it certainly makes things a lot more difficult, right? An EDR tool that's properly configured, or some sort of NDR, MXDR type tool that's properly configured on your network, ideally would be able to find obfuscated code or some sort of PowerShell that's running, or a rogue task, some sort of rogue IT that's going on, or a user that has credentials that are being abused, and point those things out to you, and easily be a portal or hub where you can then go and make changes, right? Whether it's to close ports, whether it's to remove users, whether it's to stop a task from running, you name it. You can do these things manually, but it requires a lot more work from your team in a time of stress, as you can only imagine, right? To look through, code on your own and dive into it, and dive through obfuscated code, trying to understand what it's doing within your environment, and then working to understand what other pieces of the environment may be compromised. So it is highly suggestive that you seek to invest in one way or another into a proper EDR, NDR solution for your business. There's a lot of them out there nowadays. Some of them even offer essentially MSSP-like services, where you can have that solution pushed through your network environment, and the provider will actually manage it. So they will get the alerts if something goes on. They will start taking action for containment, and they will, then contact you and work with you through that process. One other thing that shouldn't be ignored, but it's something to be very careful about, is what's called the scorched earth theory, or a strategy here. This is essentially something that we only really see in the real world, happens at the micro to small business level. Once you're a medium to larger business, this tends to be more painful than it's worth. It ends up being a Pyrrhic victory. And because what essentially is you will ultimately just end up wiping your entire network and rebuilding it from the ground up. Is it effective? Yes, of course. If you're concerned about malware or some sort of obfuscated code that's running on one of your endpoints, and you don't have EDR support, maybe you don't have financial resources to bring external vendors to then bring those technologies in, then and manual containment may be too much for your small staff, or if you're a security team of one, it may work out best depending again also on the type of business. Maybe that doesn't work in a manufacturing environment, but it works in a professional services environment. These are all things that variables that will play here. But sometimes it makes sense to just wipe it all and rebuild. Again, you have to take everything into account before you make any major decisions. One of the big things to take into account before you go all scorched earth is evidence preservation because of the forensics, right? Once you wipe the stuff, you wipe the stuff, the data's gone. So unless you're going to go through, the process of collecting logs, the process of imaging systems and things of that sort, this could have a severe impact on the company's ability to investigate. So it's absolutely critical that you talk to the leadership and you are very clear as a security professional about what it means to go down this road, because those privacy implications that we talked about, those few other things that we talked about, they depend on that evidence. So you have to preserve it. And if you don't, it can cause a lot of pain for the organization. Okay, so keep that in mind before you go into any sort of scorched earth situation for your business. Okay, regardless of how small the business is, even micro-sized businesses can have large privacy implications depending on what that business does. Okay, so it's critical that you take that into account. Some of the protocols that I wanted to take you through on this stage here is make sure you're focusing on your security goals. Again, first and foremost, right? Let your security goals always be the guiding light for your team as you take your company through the difficulties of an incident, of a cyber incident. Okay, let these principles guide you on how you will rebuild or build up new security apparatuses, and how you're going to execute on your endpoints, your cloud resources, and whatever targets it is that you need to audit during an incident. You have to take into account selection of software, selection of hardware. Some incidents may require you to get temporary hardware in place. It's not uncommon for us to see even extreme examples where you have certain businesses having to rent Wi-Fi equipment, essentially, access points, or even those 5G hotspot, little MiFi type devices. We've seen that in the real world. It happens where you have to you have to take the network down because you have a full infection, yet the business leaders are telling you, well, we have all these cloud resources that are potentially not infected. You've already confirmed that they're not infected after a few hours, and they need access to them so they can continue generating the revenue that they need to provide resources to continue the business life, and to provide you resources that you may need to recover the incident. Things like that are not as common that you see that kind of hardware being selected, but it does happen. So you have to take into account hardware, software selection when it comes to detection and analysis. You may have legacy software, or sometimes even legacy hardware that is needed because of a specific business need. We see this in manufacturing and in healthcare, especially quite often, where a dentist's office may have a very legacy operating system in the network that no longer gets security patches. That's always a concern. but it's necessary because that's the software that runs their imaging equipment, and they can't do their jobs without it. So you have to make sure that your security solutions actually work with those legacy components of the network, because if they don't, you're going to have a hard time auditing those assets during an incident, and your ability to audit those assets is directly dependent on your on your ability to actually return to work, right? To recover from the incident. So keep that stuff in mind, because it's going to be quite critical. You also need to keep in mind how you deploy hardware and software, across your environment and your business. Many of you are going to work at organizations that have multiple physical locations. How will you get a new hard drive or a new server, a new laptop out to a user who's had a compromise at a separate location? You need to take that stuff into account. How will you deploy endpoint detection response software across a network, especially if you have tons of segmentation? These sorts of things can create roadblocks for your security team. So you have to take these things into account at the time of the incident and prior to the incident as well. Ideally, you've took some of this stuff into account prior to the incident and not just during the incident. But during the incident, you absolutely need to be thinking of how you will roll out solutions so that you are not rolling out your tooling in an ineffective manner where it just hits a roadblock, and now you have to do a bunch of manual work to try to get your actual critical recovery resources to work on a large chunk of your network. You should test these things. I have that here. That's more of a proactive thought, but it's important that you are testing these resources to make sure that you can actually reach endpoints, make sure that you can actually reach different nodes in your network. You can reach cloud resources in the best way that you need. And again, going back to understanding what resources you have, internal versus external tech support always plays a critical role on detection and analysis. It's very common for folks like us here at TransUnion to get that call, hey, from one of our clients, we have an incident, our SOC is looking at it, but we need you guys to jump in and provide extra eyes, extra scans, external perimeter, internal perimeter, you name it. So know what your internal and your external tech support can provide you is critical, and especially when you're the business leader, because you're the ones who's going to have to make those decisions. And those external tech support decisions can come with big financial implications that could potentially drain your resources faster than you anticipate. So make sure that you are well aware of what's available to you, how quickly it can be deployed, and what the costs are going to look like. And then again, internal reporting. Once you actually detect an incident and you start to, okay, we found out what's wrong, we began to quarantine it or take steps, stop the threat, we took whatever steps you needed to do, whether it was closing of ports, running, specific anti-malware type solutions, whatever it is that you had to do. Now that we are doing these things, what impact does that have on the business itself? Does that allow us to return to work? Does that allow for some functionality of the business? These are all things that you have to make sure that the people who are in the need to know it. So you have to set up an internal reporting apparatus here. You have to have a pretty strict format to how you will get this information out to the teams involved. Okay. And then you come to post-incident and the recovery phase. This is at the tail end, right? At this point, ideally, you had a good incident response plan that covered all these things and you were able to rely on it. A cyber incident happened and you quickly detected the incident. You ran analysis on what the, whatever the bad thing that happened, so you had a deeper understanding of the root cause, on whether data was potentially exfiltrated from your network, different variables. Of course, you were able to contain and eradicate that threat right away. You were able to preserve evidence, and forensics may have been done now, but now what? This is surprisingly a big pitfall for a lot of companies. A lot of companies fail to use data from the incident as an actual useful metric for what to do next. They fail to hold after incident or after action type reviews, where you're actually holding an exercise to say, what are the lessons learned? What did we do right? What did we do wrong? How can we improve? Companies often fail to update their IR plans and their SOPs after an incident, believe it or not. They fail to retain evidence. Some companies, depending on what kind of business they're in, they may have a legal duty to preserve evidence for a certain amount of time. Some industries, they have demands that if they have an incident, they have to maintain certain amounts of evidence for a specific amount, number of years. Are you one of those industries? These are things that at the end of the incident, before you destroy data, destroy potentially encrypted systems, say you were hit by ransomware or anything of that sort, you're destroying log data. Before you get rid of all this stuff, you need to take that into account. Do we have any sort of duty to retain this information? And then, of course, there's the privacy considerations. You don't see this much on the large business side, but the micro to small business, they are notorious for saying, well, okay, you stopped the incident, great. You did your analysis, you found out how this happened, fantastic. You know whether data was taken, it wasn't taken, okay, that's great. So we're just gonna go back to business as it was, and that's it. And they just wanna go back to the normal. But they're not taking into account that maybe now they have to go speak to a regulator. Maybe they have to go speak to law enforcement. Depending where you are in the world, these privacy considerations will become applicable, and your business has to ensure that they follow these regulations, because that can get them in hot water if they don't. And then reporting obligations. If you're a larger publicly traded company, you may have to report that the incident. You have to report the incident to the SEC. Depending what kind of business you're in, you may have to report it to other regulators who are not necessarily a legislative body or some sort of privacy commission, but different forms of government or law enforcement again. As I mentioned, this is a stage that many organizations fail at. It's critical that you, as the technology and security leader, know how to present some of the things that we just talked about in that business language. A lot of times we find that the technical folks, once they reach the post-incident phase, they want to immediately move into new upgrades to the security apparatus and to your tooling. They want to move forward to penetration testing and all sorts of things, and that's all great. All right, it's great that you have a mindset that you want to increase security after an incident, then you want to go in and test that security. That's all fantastic, but all that testing, all those upgrades are going to cost money, right? They are going to consume resources. They're going to consume potentially external resources to help you enact those new upgrades. They will certainly consume some of your internal resources, and it's critical that the business leaders understand why you need the resources that you say you need. How is it going to increase your security? How will it address the security gaps or vulnerabilities that were taken advantage of during the current incident? These are all things that you have to present to them in their language, so they actually understand it, and so you can get their buy-in. Because otherwise, you will either meet a roadblock that you cannot overcome, or you will have a lot of struggles to actually get your goals accomplished without their buy-in and support. Okay, make sure that you are taking vulnerabilities, indicators of compromises, IOCs, any sort of CVEs, and you're creating lists of these things for that incident as the security leader or the security practicing professional. Making a list of the IOCs, making a list of the CVEs and any vulnerabilities that you identified during the incident can be a little bit of a roadmap on how to increase your security. Because what you will find is that, well, in the real world, money is always going to be a variable that's in conflict with security. No organization wants to spend more than they have to on security. Therefore, it is critical that you as the security leader absolutely make a very clear plan on what is most important, and that's what it's usually recommended, that your plan goes from critical, the way you would list vulnerabilities, kind of critical to low. This is what we absolutely need to spend time and money on. This is why. And then, you go from there into the lesser critical security upgrades that you may need to do. Make sure that you are also bringing in your external parties into this phase. A lot of times companies are very quick to dismiss their external parties, usually because they can be quite costly. But it's critical that your legal counsel is involved in how you make considerations for the future. They may have insights that will be critical to your business and will help you understand what risks from a legal perspective, for example, may be involved in a future incident. If you have external technical support that you had to bring in, make sure that these folks are also in the loop when it comes to the recovery phase, because again, they will have insights that may be unique that your internal security team simply was not in a position to see during the incident. So make sure you're bringing in these parties during this phase as well, and that they're not immediately dismissed once you've gone through the eradication of the threat. And that pretty much covers it at a high level here. We wanted to, as you know, take some time to give you folks a few minutes for Q&A. I want to thank you for your time. Sincerely, it's much appreciated, and it's been a pleasure. I'm looking forward to the next session as well, where we will talk about ransomware negotiations. That's always somewhat of a hot topic, so that'll happen next month. We'll take you through the ins and outs of what it looks like from a security professional, and from our viewpoint of what it looks like to deal with a ransomware threat actor and why we do it. What does it look like? What are the stages? Because there is some structure to those services as well. So it's going to be a fun one. But any questions? I'm starting to take a look at the chat here. And Shilpa, if you want to chime in with any questions, we have a few minutes left for it.
Thank you so much, Ada, for such an insightful and informative session. It was really a very, very interesting webinar, and we hope it was worth your time too. Now, before we begin with the Q&A, I would like to inform all the attendees that EC Council certified incident handler maps to the incident handler or incident manager role. Anyone with the ECIH certification is eligible for 17,000 plus jobs on LinkedIn globally with an average salary of $73,676. If you're interested to learn more about our program, kindly take part in the poll that's going to be conducted now. Let us know your preferred mode of training and we will reach out to you soon. So Ada, shall we start with the Q&A?
Absolutely.
Okay, so the first question is, what role can machine learning and artificial intelligence play in enhancing incident detection and response capabilities?
Okay, the most popular one is that a lot of the top EDR tools in the market are starting to build in more ML and more AI into the tooling itself. So it has more behavior analysis capabilities. That way, it's a lot more effective at understanding at a much more granular level when a user starts to abuse its normal privileges or has unusual behavior. That could be, you know, even an admin user who normally does not do specific lateral movements within the network or something of that sort. These can all be early indicators that a ML or AI could help in detecting the incident, and before something more nefarious like an actual like ransomware payload or something of that sort being executed on target.
Thank you, Edo, for answering that question. Our next question is, can you provide examples of sophisticated attack techniques and how incident response strategies should adapt to them?
Sure. I mean, I could speak for hours on that, but there's a lot of fairly advanced techniques nowadays, whether, you know, it's a ransomware threat actor who may look to leverage a local premise vulnerability that you may not be aware of, which then leads to an initial penetration of the network. From then, they may put in some very advanced diskless malware that is very good at evading, especially classic antivirus that's aimed at harvesting credentials. And, you know, once they get your admin credentials, those are the keys to the kingdom, and it's mostly game over for most victims at that point. Well, or most organizations at that point. That's how they become victims. So these are common techniques that are fairly advanced, but they can possibly be mitigated with good cyber hygiene, good understanding of your exposure, good understanding what the attack vectors are, and proper deployment of technical resources such as those EDR resources. And then another quick example would probably be attacker in the middles, attacks that we're seeing now that are actually aimed at bypassing weaker forms of multi-factor authentication, such as SMS or OTP. There's a lot of that going out. That's actually, I think, one of my small predictions here. I think for 2024, we're going to see a large increase in attacker in the middle type of attacks. And it's how a lot of threat actors are going to bypass MFA. So it'll be critical for your org to implement better, stronger forms of multi-factor authentication so you're not at risk to some of those attacks. And also implement better forms to authenticate users, a better understanding of validity or of a token. Don't want to go too much deeper into it because, again, this could go on for hours, but those are a couple examples there. Hope that addresses the question.
Yes, thank you so much, Edo, for answering that question. Our next question is, what are the disadvantages of having a cyber insurance while you are attacked by threat actors motivated by financial gains?
Well, the disadvantages are very few, in my opinion. You know, I'm a big proponent, and we're a big proponent of cyber insurance here because we see that it does far, far, far more help than not. There are companies that obviously don't have insurance, usually are major companies, like really, really large companies. And that's often because their risk is so large that in order to insure their risk, the cost of the insurance would be astronomical. So these companies end up deciding that cyber insurance isn't always a good fit for them. But that is a minority of companies. One, most threat actors don't know where your insurance details are. You know, you can also look to obfuscate that and make sure you're not keeping, you know, copies of your insurance policy in readily available locations, you know, or in multiple locations. They don't always know. So the vast majority of the time, the threat actor doesn't know what your insurance resources may or may not be. So it's very little, you know, disadvantage there because they don't care. They don't care if you have insurance. They don't care if you don't have insurance, right? Especially say a very financially motivated threat actor, like a ransomware threat actor. They want their money. They have encrypted your environment. They probably stole some of your data. They're going to likely leak it, and they want their money. There's whether you have insurance or not, that's not really going to make a difference. There are
Thank
caveats
you.
there, but rare.
Yeah. Thank you for answering that question. We'll take last two questions for the day. So our next question is, what is your take on the applications of ML and incident response? Is it trustworthy?
Is it just what? Can you repeat the last part?
You want me to repeat the question?
Please.
Okay. What is your take on the applications of ML and incident response? Is it trustworthy?
Is it trustworthy? It can be. It can be. It absolutely can be. It really depends where you're putting that ML resources. If your ML resources are attached to detection, yes, likely decently trustworthy. You have to address false positives, and how do you react to false positives, and how do you test for false positives? But besides that, it's good. Now, when we see a lot of ML in eradication, that's a little more concerning, because it's something, that phase requires a lot of certainty. If you don't properly eradicate and contain an environment, you're still compromised. And we've seen that happen many times. And it's a very painful situation when that happens, because now sometimes the threat actor gains knowledge of what you're doing to push them out, and of external resources. And that ties into the insurance question right before. That's often when the threat actors find out you have insurance, and they get some idea of what your coverage levels may be, which then make any sort of negotiation with them or any sort of financial conversations a lot more difficult, because they don't understand insurance. So they see one big number there and they think that that's what you have, and it becomes a mess. So ML is not normally used as much in containment in that sense, not yet at least, but it can be trustworthy. It really depends where you're putting those resources to work.
Thank you, Eda. Our last question for the day is, what are the tools would you suggest which would help IR teams to communicate during the case of incident when all the existing mode of communications are ceased to exist?
You have to make that decision for what's going to fit best for your organization, of course. But it is not uncommon for security teams to have non-attributed tools that they will use for communication. And by non-attributed, I mean not part of your domain. If you're fully encrypted, well, your Teams isn't going to work anymore. Your Zoom's not going to work anymore. Your email might not work if it's on premise. If you have segmentation, you may be communicating via email still. If you were able to do a quick enough analysis of your email tenant to make sure that it is safe, or that becomes a primary focus, is to make sure email is actually safe so you can return to communications. But it's not uncommon for security teams to have signal channels or QTOX channels, or other sorts of end-to-end encrypted communication apps that they're using to talk when they are running red team exercises and during live incidents, before they can actually get regular company communication resources back up and running.
Thank you so much, Eda, for answering those questions and for the great presentation and knowledge shared with our global audiences. It was really a pleasure to have you with us, and we are looking for more and more sessions with you. Now, before we conclude the webinar, Eda, would you like to give a small message to our audiences, please?
Yes, again, thank you everyone for your time. It's really appreciated. really look forward to doing these. I hope that this session was of like helpful and useful to you, and gave you a good overview into what an IR case looks like, what the life cycle are, what are the considerations you have to take. I hope that this is a good base to then allow us to have further conversations in the future as we go along. And again, tune in again a month from now, third Thursday of next month, and we'll be talking about ransomware and ransomware negotiations. Where do they fit within that IR lifecycle? What some of the considerations we talked about today are critical in that stage. That will all come into play. Should be a fun session. It's a very interesting, hot topic. So I look forward to that very much, and I wish you all best of luck out there and a great day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ada. As you were talking about the next session, I have just got a request for, if we could have a follow-up talk focused on ransomware analysis and recovery. Okay.
So we can talk about that for sure.
Yeah, we have got that request. So thank you so much, Ada, for such a beautiful message. Now, before we end the session, I would like to announce our next Cyber Talk session, Bad, Good, and Best Password Practices, Preventing Dictionary-Based Attacks, Part 2. It is scheduled for tomorrow, January 19, 2024. This session is an expert presentation by Sergey Suarez, security expert. To register for this session, please do go visit our website www.ecc.edu/cybertalks. The link is given in the chat section. Hope to see you all tomorrow. With this, we end the session. You may now disconnect your lines. Thank you. Thank you so much, Ada. Pleasure having you. Bye-bye.